Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 141 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's episode, I want to further round out the conversation started back in episode 135 on H. pylori and skin rashes. The reason is that the initial episode was so popular, and as a result, I got a ton of questions. I realized that there was a need for more clear information on next steps on how to deal with H. pylori beyond what I discussed. This episode, which is essentially a part 2 to that initial discussion, is dedicated to answering all of your questions. One of the biggest takeaways that I hope to impart herein is that it's not typically just an H. pylori issue that you've got to deal with. H. pylori can be a root cause, but it often triggers a chain reaction of problems that also need to be addressed and will not resolve just because you got rid of H. pylori. Keep that in mind as you go through this process. So once you've confirmed that you do in fact have H. pylori, it's natural to ask what you can do to give it the boot. In today's episode, I'm going to cover the strategies that have worked for my clients in my virtual clinical practice and that have research to back them up. That said, this episode is for informational purposes only, and you should either discuss these options with your practitioner first before taking action or get some help. As I said, I do have a virtual clinic and do work with people all over the world. Depending on the severity of your symptoms, H. pylori can do serious damage to your GI tract, like bleeding ulcers. So getting guidance on your next steps can be a really good idea, especially if you're on other medication or have a complicated health history with a bunch of different things going on. So since the launch of that first episode about H. pylori, I've been asked so many times, what's the best diet to get rid of H. pylori? And the truth is, no diet exists to help you get rid of H. pylori. Nor are there any elimination diets with clinical research proving they work that can effectively remove H. pylori. While there are diet tips that can help you manage symptoms like heartburn, H. pylori is not a food fixable problem. And this is important given that H. pylori can do a lot of damage if left unaddressed. Even if your symptoms seem to abate if you shift your diet, that does not mean that H. pylori is gone. Using dietary tactics in this way only manages symptoms and is, to some degree, like a Band-Aid. The only way to be sure that H. pylori is gone is to test for it, as many people do not have any classical symptoms pointing to it. That said, there are some foods that can help you therapeutically. So if you've got heartburn, for example, which is one of the more common symptoms, removing common trigger foods such as tomato, chocolate, coffee, and caffeinated beverages, alcohol and red wine, spicy and fried foods, citrus, and peppermint may help you along with elevating the head of your bed in the event that the burning sensation worsens at night. And though there isn't a diet that can eliminate H. pylori, there are certain foods that can be helpful. Helpful H. pylori foods include sauerkraut juice, broccoli sprouts because they have such a high concentration of sulforaphanes along with other cruciferous vegetables, blueberry juice, manuka honey, omega-3 foods like cold water fish, ground flax, and olive oil. Adding these to your diet may be helpful as you use more quote-unquote heavy-duty tools to help you give H. pylori the boot. Now, before we go into the alternative options to approach H. pylori, I want to talk about the conventional approach first. Conventional approaches to dealing with H. pylori infections commonly include a triple antibiotic combo along with a proton pump inhibitor that lasts anywhere from 7 to 14 days. I recognize and understand that many people in this community are uncomfortable with the idea of using these types of medications. But there can be a time and a place for antibiotics, especially if your case is severe. Whatever you decide, with the help of your doctor, should be based on a variety of factors, including what else is going on with your gut health. Just as there are no guarantees with pretty much anything in life, There can also be failures to clear H. pylori on the first attempt with standard triple antibiotic therapy. One reason failures can occur has to do with the increasing rate of antibiotic resistance in today's world. Research demonstrates that there are some other options that may prove better alternatives should you need to do a second round of treatment. Obviously, discussing them with your doctor would be critical to gauge what's best for you. Now, as far as alternative approaches are concerned, there are options. So yes, they do exist. And for some people, they may be good options to consider, and I use them in my clinical practice. Those include Saccharomyces boulardii, mastic gum, lactoferrin, bismuth, zinc carnosine, colostrum, and deglycyrrhizinated licorice, also known for short and way easier to pronounce DGL. There are certainly other natural agents available, such as aloe vera, quercetin, and melatonin, but those, to be honest with you, lack human studies that help us understand their effectiveness. Most of the research on them has been done in animals or in test tubes. From my experience as a clinical nutritionist, you cannot just pick one of these options and assume it will work. Typically, a combination is required in order to be more effective. The choices that I would ultimately suggest depend on the complete picture of what's going on with a client. For example, I definitely would not suggest that everyone use Saccharomyces boulardii. The reason is that S. boulardii is not ideal if you struggle with constipation. S. boulardii is actually known to slow stool transit time, which means it can be really helpful if you're more diarrhea prone. But if you're not pooping 1 to 3 times a day, and your bowel movements are hard or like little rocks or pebbles, S. boulardii will only make you more constipated. And then there's lactoferrin and colostrum. So those may not be a good idea for those with a dairy or alpha-gal allergy, or those who are vegan, because both are derived from cow's milk. So you can see how this gets a little complicated. If you need help picking a formula or combo that's right for you, speak with your practitioner or feel free to get in touch so that we can talk through what's going on. And again, it goes without saying that failure to clear H. pylori does exist even with the natural options. One of the most surprising and important points that I mentioned in part 1 of this series is that H. pylori can be found in saliva. That unfortunately means that it can be passed between partners. It's very common in my clinical practice to discover that a client has H. pylori and then their partner tests positive for H. pylori as well. The reason this is a big deal is because it's possible to get H. pylori again. If you discover you have it and then get rid of it, you could become reinfected by your partner. This certainly isn't the only way to get H. pylori a second time, but it's a big issue to consider. So yes, reinfection is possible. And while I do not consider myself an expert by any means in infections, because I'm certainly not a doctor nor a scientist, my many interviews with people who are suggest that difficulty clearing H. pylori can happen. Some listeners emailed me stating that they've been on numerous unsuccessful antibiotic and even alternative regimens to get rid of H. pylori. In those cases, you'll need to look deeper than H. pylori and even consider issues such as mold and mycotoxin exposure as potential problems. That's why you must retest to ensure H. pylori is gone rather than assume it's gone because your symptoms have lessened or seem to have disappeared. I really hope that this part 2 of the H. pylori saga provides you more insight on the next steps so that if you discover you have H. pylori, you know what to discuss with your practitioner and consider for yourself. Again, an important reminder to you that before you start taking any supplements or making really drastic shifts to your diet, please discuss it with your doctor first. You are unique, and there can be a time and a place for different approaches. If you've got any more H. pylori questions, head on over to skinterrupt.com/141 and leave your thoughts there so we can keep the conversation going. And if you know anyone who's been trying to figure out what to do about their H. pylori, please share this episode with them. This really could be very helpful as well as eye-opening to know that there are other options out there than just maybe the one that they've been presented initially. And before you head out for your day, Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. That way the next episode lands on your mobile device without you having to do a thing. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.